So that was Lieutenant General David Morrison from Australia. I actually think if we could just clone him, send him around the world, nobody would argue with that man about gender equality. It's a shame there's only one of him. All right, so Kelly Wallace from CNN correspondent, what are you doing up here?
I'm thrilled to be here. Tough act to follow. I have been a longtime news correspondent, and a lot of us come to this issue through our personal lives. Almost 9 years ago now, I had my first child, and I consider myself someone who always cared about women's issues, always pushed to cover those stories when I was a reporter, but it was as if the light bulb went off the minute I had my daughter. I cared so much more about issues of fairness in the workplace, work-life balance, empowering our girls. 7 years ago, I had my second girl, so it seems as if I'm really committed to this cause. And I've been very fortunate at a women's website and now at CNN, where I've really made it an opportunity to take my passion on these issues affecting women and girls and boys and men and try to bring them out to a wider audience right now at CNN and CNN.com.
Luis Mora is Chief of the Gender, Human Rights and Culture Branch for UNFPA. Nice title, but why do you deserve a seat at the table?
Thank you very much. First of all, I have to say that I really took very seriously the fact that this was an unconventional, meeting, and that's the way, how I dress when I go to the barbershop. So just to say that. I think that in that case, I'm sitting here because I represent UNFPA. And I have to say that UNFPA, the United Nations Population Fund, for many years, for decades now, has really, put a strong emphasis on engaging with men and boys. And I have the chance, in that sense, to be part of the first barbershop program at the end of the 90s in Dominican Republic. So it was almost, it's almost 20 years later when we are precisely talking about that, and when we are, in a way addressing the work and the need to engage men and boys in a broader, from a broader scope. And at the same time, I would like to say that for UNFPA, this is not only part, let's say, of external rhetoric. It's not only part of a discourse. UNFPA for the last years, and I would say for the last decade, has also ensured that internally we reach parity in terms of having men and women at the same managerial positions across the organization.
So how many women do you have in the organization?
We have we have more women than men, around, let's say, 2,000 women. But women are placed as men in managerial positions in an equal foot.
How does that help?
I think that helps a lot because that brings, not only a different perspective, but yesterday one of our colleagues from an NGO working here in New York was precisely referring to the need to have this, joint leadership role, no? Men and women working together for the same purposes as part of a continuous ongoing dialogue.
See, Todd Minison is nodding. There's something going on behind that nod. He's the executive director of the White Ribbon Campaign. Your secret sauce for today's discussion is what? What are you bringing?
The secrets, well, I don't know exactly why I'm here. I ask myself that every morning, but I think it's because I wear a couple of different hats. One is the executive director of the White Ribbon Campaign, which is a Canadian-based NGO that, together with our partners and collaborators, is the largest effort of men and boys around the world working to end gender-based violence. Another hat that I think I'm here wearing is a member of the Secretary General's network of male leaders to end violence against women, a member of the UN Women Global Civil Society Advisory Group. But I think the most important hat that I'm wearing is husband, father, man who genuinely cares about making a difference on gender equality. And I hope that that's the hat that is the most important one that I wear.
Your head must be very warm. You've got so many hats on. Yes. Chris Graves is the global CEO of Ogilvy Public Relations. Aside from the PR speak, I mean, really candidly, what do you have to offer?
Nothing.
Not that candid.
I am here because of the leadership of the executive director of UN Women, Phumzile, and the architect of the He for She campaign, Elizabeth Nyamayaro, who deserve an enormous applause for this. I am here because as a very, very old, very large global communications company, we are deeply committed to this. It's smart, it's right. And so I've been enlisted in their army to help. And so Ogilvy has actually been working with them. And I'm here to issue a warning. And the warning is that there is a science to behavior change and a science to communications related to behavior change, and that many times such efforts as this backfire because they're not respecting the underlying science of communication change. And that science says that we humans are very, very weak, that we just want to fit in, and we take implicit cues as to where we fit in. And so if we think a problem is pervasive, we think it's also accepted. And so if we point only to the problem, we will assume that the problem is the right way. And instead, if you look at what some of the real heroes in the He for She campaign are doing, like a man named Sunil Desai, who runs the Bindi Project, a former US Marine running a Bindi Project in India, he champions the fathers, the colleagues, the sons who are modeling the right behavior. So if you merely point out the problem, you will imply that is the cultural norm. And we need to reverse it to show that the right way is the good way.
Chris, share a bit more of the right way.
So the right way is this. In communications, you need to make sure you're choosing the models and showing that actually they're often a silent majority, that the people doing the right thing. A couple of very, very quick examples. These are things you've encountered in your own life. You check into a hotel, you see the little card, and the card says, "Be green." And most people are not green because the card tells you just don't have your laundry done, don't have your sheets taken up, don't put your towels in the laundry. But the hotel is trying, but the communication is all wrong. When they say 75% of people who stayed in your room before you chose not to have their laundry due every day, that's the implicit tribe you want to be part of. And you sign up. When you tell people not to litter because litter is everywhere, they litter because litter is everywhere. When you show them that really smart, good people would never dream of littering, they hesitate before they litter. So there are very practical examples in the science of communications and behavior change that we must be careful we're pointing out to the right behavior in he for she and not being overwhelmed by the implied wrong behavior.
Todd, then Kelly.
I'm like pleasantly surprised to be in agreement with my friend beside me here from an evidence-based perspective in the civil society side of things, in the work that we do around behavior change as well. You know, marketing and social justice sometimes is not that far apart. But we know, for example, that when we want to work with men on issues of gender equality and on issues around preventing violence against women, we can't use fear, we can't use shame, we can't use guilt to change those social norms. Those things alienate the men who are willing to make those changes. Those things perpetuate the norms that we want to get rid of. And what we find in working with men is that what we actually need to do is show them the roadmaps of how to get there, to validate the things that they are doing around gender equality, and to push them further and farther in those efforts.
For example, we're looking for practical examples today, because everybody here is like, this is great, I'm inspired. How do I do it?
Well, I mean, one thing that we have to push men towards is that this is not, we're not going to solve the scope of this problem by clicking a like on a social media page. That it's a lifelong change that you need to embrace and look at in the way that you engage the world as a father, as a family member, as a community member, as a business leader, as a faith leader, that in all of those realms, there's practical things that men can do to make a difference.
And I would just chime in, I mean, the role of media is so important here. Oh, is there too much?
Todd, turn your mic off. There we go.
And for a number of stories I've done, I can't tell you how many men I hear from who get so frustrated with the caricature of the bumbling dad who doesn't know how to make breakfast, who can't figure out how to get the child to school. And if you look at television, if you look at film, you look at commercials, for such a long time, you didn't see that dad that was very involved and an equal player in the household. Or maybe it was the stay-at-home dad while his wife was out in the workforce. I think we're seeing change, and brands, for sure, I think are recognizing the power of these men who are engaged in their household lives and the household decisions. But I think our boys and our men have to see it more, certainly, and then they can be it. And it also comes to in our families. I mean, we know that the more involved our fathers are in our children's lives from the earliest time, that really impacts their view of masculinity and what it is to be a man. I mean, we were talking about it. If you see your dad changing the diapers, making breakfast, my husband and I are juggling the morning just like every other household pretty much, I have to believe that boys who grow up in those environments are going to have a different view of what it is to be a man and what masculinity is, as opposed to some of the images that we continue to see where you have to be strong and man up and be tough. I think they'll develop a different portrait of what's possible, and that would be so healthy for them and for gender equality in society in general.
I know, Todd, you want to interject, but let Louis go first and then Todd second.
Yes, thank you. I think we also need to understand that men are not homogeneous, an homogeneous community. So in that sense, we also need to look at the different roles men play. Men can be, and at UNFPA we have been working with men, as partners, as husbands, fathers, etc. Men can be also agents of change.
So
yes.
I love these generalizations, not.
Uh-huh.
We have been working with men and husbands. And what work?
Okay,
Tell us.
Let me just give some examples, because sometimes it's not so complicated. No, sometimes naming things in a different way can change a lot. And I will give you an example. I remember, for instance, in a Latin American country, I'm not going to mention the country, there was a museum, which was the largest museum in the country for kids. But the museum was called the Boys Museum. Just change that and call it the Girls and Boys Museum made a huge difference. And for the first time in the history of the country, girls felt, welcome in that place. For instance, the Barbershops programs. This is very simple. Just to work with men working in barbershops can make a huge difference, because every day they are interacting with other men. So sometimes these very small, projects or initiatives can make, a difference.
I wanted to add in here a little bit of an element that we're dancing around, which is this challenge we're having with men of understanding how this system of sexism and patriarchy is killing us, as well as the tremendous harm that it causes to women and girls. This notion that we did some work with some 9-year-old boys in Canada, and we asked them what they don't like about being a boy. And the number one thing on this list was not being able to be a mother. And we asked this little guy what he meant by that. And he said, when I look on TV, I never see men in caregiving roles. I never see men loving, nurturing, being part of that equation. And
Todd,
at 9 years old,
he was 9.
he couldn't.
Did he say caregiving? He didn't say caregiving.
He said loving, hugging,
right.
holding.
You're adding to the story, but we like it anyway. Continue with the story.
Yeah. So I mean, there's this is happening at an early age 9 years old. But even as adult men, we haven't seemed to grasp the fact that this is a system that's killing us as well. And let's look at one specific example. If we look at some, for example, myths around sexual violence, right? What happens when we hear about a sexual assault? Sometimes the conversation goes in places like this. What was she wearing? What was she doing there? Was she drinking too much? Did she invite that? Obviously, that says some horrific things about what we think about women, their rights to be in spaces and be safe, their rights to not be sexually objectified. But what does it also say about men? It says we're a mini skirt away from being a rapist. It says we are unable or incapable or unwilling of making respectful, healthy, consensual decisions around sexuality. We haven't built in that understanding that this portrayal of a world where men have more power and privilege than women is awful for us as well. And I think that's something I really hope that these kinds of conversations lead us towards.
Two practical things. One, you can't do this without the private sector. This cannot just be NGOs and governments lecturing. The private sector has to pull this off. Now, the private sector can't do it by lecturing either. And as much as we need them, they can't do it just by diversity officers. There are some very practical cultural things that if you're a man and you're a manager in any kind of business, know this. The book by Claire Shipman and Katty Kay called The Confidence Code points out to research of dynamics of men and women in business. And imagine and it probably happens, I'm sure, in your meetings as well, that in a meeting, men, boys, young men have no problem asserting any old fact or fiction. Even if they just thought of it and there's no evidence that it's true, they have no problem asserting it as though it's a very important thing and you should listen to me right now. But women tend to hold back and want to determine whether or not it is true. They hold back and want to do a bit more research. They don't want to be that jerk who puts forward an opinion. I see nods of understanding over there. They don't want to be that jerk that puts forward the opinion that is unresearched. And so it's interpreted by a male boss as lack of assertiveness. That the woman being quiet, who is actually being diligent, is seen as lack of assertiveness. So here's a practical thing. Training for male managers to elicit the thoughts of women in their groups rather than just bypass them and assume they're not assertive. Second, college campuses across the United States have made the news for gender-based violence, sexual assault. A lot of it is blamed on institutions such as single-gender organizations like fraternities. And many are either determining whether to ban fraternities or perhaps even more effective, make them co-ed, because they have found that once you change the dynamic and make it co-ed, some of these things melt away. But a huge part of it, and the general alluded to this, is bystander training. Having the guts that it is a cultural norm to intervene. I will not let it stand if I observe it, whether I'm a manager at work or whether I'm a mini skirt away from rape in a fraternity.
I love all that, and I wanted to jump on, in terms of the private sector, a real-life example for a story I was doing on how we continue to see little movement here in the United States on the number of women on corporate boards and in executive positions, and why is that? And the CEO of Kimberly Falk, which actually has a good number of women on boards and in executive positions, says it really does come down to continuing to have that conversation and in that bystander role, think about what you can do and do more of it. He said, I thought I was someone who was really doing a lot when it comes to gender, but my board was saying, no, you're not doing enough, you're not doing enough. So he told this story of how he had one of his executives wanted to hire a female national sales manager. So his team, he said, go look out for candidates and let's see where we go. So the team comes back and says, sorry, boss, we can't find any good female national sales managers. And the boss said, really? Why don't you let me interview all the possible candidates you found, and I can make the decision? Well, guess what? They quickly went and found some female candidates that he could interview, and he found the candidate. So the point is, they thought, well, we're not really going to find a person who's qualified. There aren't enough people out there. And it requires, like you said, the bystanders and the managers to do more. Another story, Harvard Business School, looking at the issue again about men and women on corporate boards, asked board members, why aren't there more women on corporate boards? The men said, not enough supply. We can't find enough good candidates to be on the board. The women said, are you kidding me? It's we can't get in there. If you don't change boards, if you only change boards every 10 or 20 years, if you only look at corporate CEOs, how are we going to get in? So it requires the managers, the bystanders for that bigger thinking. And my final point, I'm hogging here because I have so much to say on this, is the issue of fairness. That Kimberly Fox CEO said, it's about finding the best talent, really. If you are going to pick a team, and you're going to look at everyone in this room for the team, and then someone else is going to pick the team, but only look at the men, who's going to have a better team? The person who looked at all of the people in this room and found the best talent in this room, as opposed to the person who just cut off 50% of the room and found the best talent within there. So I thought that message is so key too, because people get put off about, oh, we just need to add more women. No, we're talking about finding the best talent and looking at the pool of men and women to find that talent and fill the slots.
Louis, wrap us up, because we have to go.
Thank you. No, I think this let's say, formal activities or interventions regarding standards are extremely important. But we have also learned over the last 2 decades that all the investment in terms of developing policy frameworks, legal frameworks, et cetera, is not enough. And I think that we also need to move the discourse from this emphasis just on legal policy, programmatic frameworks, to understanding gender equality. As it was referred this morning, gender equality and engaging men is also about transforming hearts. And I think this is the real message. And we do not transform hearts through just, let's say, policy, legal, and programmatic frameworks. And this is the challenge now, how we transform hearts in order to make, as the Deputy Secretary General was saying, the President of the General Assembly was saying, the 21st century, the gender equality century.
All right, so Louis from the UNFPA talked about a barbershop program that they have been running for 20 years. I want you to see that, but before you see that, I'm hoping that some of your hearts have been transformed by Kelly, by Louis, by Todd, and Chris. Gentlemen and ladies, your panel.